Hello, welcome. Such a pleasure to virtually meet your acquaintance again, or for the first time. Blessings and welcome from my heart and hearth to yours. And I'm so excited to start our journey right at the beginning, as this is my first vlog entry, I suppose. We're going to journey inward together. Appropriately titled, Heed the Call. This conversation between us will be regarding precisely that. How your path called you and how you answered it. When. And how that influences where you are today and the trajectory of your path to follow. So, let's further inspect. And also, just to make things interesting, look at some more notorious people within the community of witchcraft, esotericism, druidry, paganism, etc. And see how they heeded the call. So grab your drink of choice and venture with me inward. As always, I'm going to begin by clearing and consecrating the energy and space around and about. So, cheers while I do that. Salancha. Okay. So, firstly, I would like to share with you how, my background, a little bit about how I received my calling into craft, as it were. So, I was the eldest of 5 in a very predominantly Irish Catholic family. I grew up on the ocean, a little barrier island on the east coast of the United States. And my father was Irish Catholic, my mother was Irish Catholic, but my paternal side was very, I'd say much more devout and conventional than I'd say somewhat of my mother's side, where there was this kind of dualistic factor at play where, yes, they were also devout, but they would go to church and then throw chicken bones in the kitchen. Or, we had a lot of tarot enthusiasts and an aunt who was a clairvoyant, things of that nature. So I did have on one end a very strongly, this influence of, no, stay away from that, that's the devil. And then on the other end, there was this more welcoming, nurture of spirituality intermixed with faith, as it were. So, that being said, just naturally growing up on the ocean, I found personally that I had a very strong relationship with nature. That's something that was prevalent my entire life. When I would submerge myself in the ocean, in that salty, purifying, dark, moving water, that the energy of it would affect me fairly profoundly. Or when I was, outside and there was a thunderstorm, that the energy of this would almost magnify my own energy. That I would have a response to nature. If I was in the woods or there was a night sky and I was by myself, there was this ethereal feel almost of divinity that just existed. It was like my soul almost communing with nature. And that's something that I had since I was a child, quite honestly. So I've always had this relationship with the wild, and I always catered to that aspect of myself. I love camping and being in nature, and still to this day, it's part of my practice, but it's also something I thoroughly enjoy. Also, that being said, very naturally, I always leaned in towards more of the unconventional sides of society. I guess the more dark, macabre, those areas that were uncomfortable for a lot of people, I was very curious about. I was always naturally interested in scary stories, Ouija boards, kind of communicating with ghosts. In fact, I don't think it was really an influence from my grandmother per se, but my grandmother, she convened with spirits. I mean, she was a very devout Catholic, Irish Catholic woman, but she was so caught up in communicating and seeing spirit that even as she aged in life and her old Victorian house was crumbling around her, we literally had to remove her from it later on in life, unfortunately. It was very, very hard and sad, especially for my mother and my aunt at the time, because she had such a connection, I think, with the people who had passed on in the house, that my grandmother had just such a strong, energetic connection that it was very difficult for her to leave, regardless of the physical, situation that the house was. It was basically condemned. But anyway, I, as a young kid, had an imaginary friend named Charlie. He was an older man. I'm sure that scared the out of my parents. I knew a lot of information regarding him, this, that, and the third. And, there were situations that took place. But again, I had the ability to, I think, kind of interact as well. And had it not been, highly disregarded and like, you need to stop this, maybe if it had been nurtured back then, would have been stronger for me. More so in present years, it had to be cultivated again. Okay. But I will say that we did find out later on that there was a man named Charlie who had passed away in my childhood bedroom at the time. So that being said, never knock a child who's in tune with the energies around them. So whether you believe in this kind of thing or not, all systems of belief are entirely personal and up to you. So, but I, and besides leaning into the other side of life, death, I found my peace of mind, clarity, in cemeteries. I was always driven towards them, not in a very, nothing against Gothic, but not in a very dark way, or not even mystical way, to be quite fair and honest. Just in the sense that when trauma would occur in my life, that's where I would find myself. And I was a poet. I'm a writer. So I would oftentimes do most of my writing alone in the cemetery, or gathering my thoughts, or thinking about life and my own life. And I think in my high school years, I was spending most of my weekends at the cemetery in Westmont, New Jersey, right outside of Camden. And one of my favorite poets, Walt Whitman, is buried there. He's got a mausoleum. And I used to have lunch with Walt quite frequently in those days, and do a lot of writing, sulking, teenage things of that nature. But I still find myself drawn to a cemetery for solace, for peace of mind. There's an energy there that is the direct opposite of fear and death and sadness. When you think of all the sorrow and loss and tears that go into the soil there, you can also, everything has its equal opposite balance. But anyway, so in regards to heeding the call, there's these natural inclinations that exist. And then there's these catalysts in life that project you, I think. And some of those things for me were novels and books. And for a very long time, I was a solitary witch until a coven found me, which is a video for a whole nother time. However, as you will see shortly, it's a prominent theme, the discovery of oneself through trauma, through deaths, and also through authors, through books, and then intermixed with life experience, and voila, all of a sudden revealed to you is a path or a door, and you simply walk through, and you blindly, trial and error, your way into the mystical world of faith, whatever it is you believe in or have faith in. So, with that humble beginning and introduction on myself, I would love to know what set you on your path, what called you, and how did you heed it? When did that happen for you? What were your natural inclinations? And let's start. I will say this too. When I dove deep in my very humble beginnings, and I'd say I was probably like a teenager when I started doing this, preteen maybe. I started researching, like most of us do, honestly. It's been something I've encountered a lot. Esotericism. The idea that you go back way before pre-Abrahamic religions and, Egyptian times and texts and hieroglyphics, and you try to piece together history in a spiritual sense and in the human understanding, in the mythos. And also you start studying people like Hermes Trismegistus and Socrates, Plato, numerical orders, divine, mathematics like John Dee and Edward Kelly in the 1500s, when, this person, John, he advised Queen Elizabeth and rose to fame. Later he had met Edward Kelly, I think his name was, and who was a medium, and together they conversed with the angels and would receive all sorts of messages. And one of those messages said, escape England and go to Poland to get away from British spies. And so they did. And when they would get there, the angel said, once you're in Poland, we'll give you another revelation. And when they got there, they received a revelation of, and they started writing what would become, the Enochian magic, in conversing with the angels. And there were different themes that also intermingled to create chaos magic and, the kind of the language of the angels, which was very from the stomach, with certain vowels. And I think it was called the lingua adamica or something like that. It's been a while, but Enochian magic. And also that would lead you into places like the Abramelin, right? The mage. And that would lead you into Samuel Liddell McGregor, who was one of the co-founders of the Golden Dawn. And the Golden Dawn would spin you right round, baby, right round, into, places like some of the greats of A.E. Waite, who created the Rider-Waite deck, and I think who was the name of that girl? Pamela Coleman Smith, I think her name was. I'm not sure. Don't quote me on everything. And she was the artist who did his deck, but he was in the Golden Dawn. And how he got started is that he was born in the United States, and his father died at a young age, and he moved with his British mother back to England. He started college when he was 13, and I think it was at some school named St. George. And his sister, Frederica Waite, died, and it was traumatic for him. And so it sent him to the library of the British Museum, and he would pull books and on branches of esotericism to study, modalities of speaking with the dead and trying to contact his sister. Don't quote me on any of this stuff, but this is, all out the left cheek here. And so that's what kind of catapulted him into it. And later on in life, he, through, intermingling in circles, he joined the Golden Dawn alongside Yeats, W.B. Yeats, the famous Irish poet, Aleister Crowley, who is famed and notorious for being hedonistic. He also lost his father at a young age, Aleister. Aleister lost his father. He was from a very fundamentalist, family. And I want to say like his dad was even like a priest or reverend or something like that. And he would have little Aleister, who, by the way, his name wasn't Aleister. He was actually born Ed Alexander. And he later on, I think in his 20s, was like Aleister's the Gaelic version of Alexander. And I think he had something, he had like he had a penchant for Alexander the Great or something. So he was like Aleister. Anyway, he inherited a third of his father's fortune. And his mom was like super upset with him because he was like, you know what? Did our belief system save Dad from dying? Nah. Nope. Your belief system. And he completely, he was repulsed by it. And he reeled against it. And his mom said he was a little beastie. Called him a beast. To which he nurtured the name. And he was like, I love it. So, you know, he went to Cambridge, Trinity College, Cambridge. And when he did, he had this. He went to Stockholm on like a vacation, or like one of the, I don't know what, off times from school. And he was very fluid with his sexuality. And so the story goes that he had like this holiday, and he performed this like mystical quest where he did an evocation, he planted seed and had sexual relations with a male student who didn't really return the affection as much. But this followed him later on in life. He dropped out of college. He joined the secret brotherhood of the Golden Dawn. It was the first order. I think it's the secret Great White Brotherhood or something like that, of the Golden Dawn. And that was run at the time by the Samuel Liddell McGregor. And he climbed the ranks. But the people that were involved in it at that time, W.B. Yeats, like I told you, A.E. Waite, they didn't like his style. Waite was notorious for saying, like, Crowley is a sicko. He's way too dark. He's known as the Black Magician, of course. He embraced that fully. I mean, he was really into Indic, influences, tantric sex and meditations and yoga and things of that nature. And he was did a lot of sexual exploration and rites, and was super involved with guardian angels and the Keys of Solomon, etc. And you can go through that all you want on your own journeys. However, point being, he developed thelemic approaches to magic, and he's very renowned within the community. And his start, I believe, from just researching him for a little bit, it was propelled by his father's death, causing him to rethink, and also he just was not in the fluid. And then he proceeded to go to school and, was enlightened by, his studies. So again, what else is really fun to mention is he was a poet too. He just wrote very crude stuff. In fact, just for entertainment purposes alone, I suggest reading some of his work. It's the people of the day were very repulsed by his works. His poetry was very crude and had a lot of sexual, you can't even say undertones because they were very much in your face. But, Allie. Moving on, Gerald Gardner. Everybody knows old Jerry. The grand old man of witchcraft. He's hand in hand, I'd say, with Ross Nichols. Both were nudists. I believe they met at a nudist colony. Ross, Mr. Nichols, was renowned for being the founder of the Druidic, the modern take on the Druidry, and the bards and the Ovids and the order that we know of today. And Gerald, he modernized and pioneered Wicca as we know it. He kind of revived the movement, where Nichols revived the movement of, I guess, ancient Celtic neo-paganism and Druidry as an earthen religion. And Gardner, who pioneered witchcraft revival movement, probably arguably was the most notable in that. It's stated that he initially got into it via his travels. So Gerald, he was pretty wealthy too, but he had bad asthma. And he had a nursemaid, an Irish nursemaid, who married a man, and they went to Sri Lanka. And good old Jerry followed them there and ended up being a rubber tree planter in Malaysia. Now, while in Malaysia, he grew to have this fanatical fascination almost with ritual tools of the Malaysian civilizations. So he got into studying the utilization and, how they procured and utilized their ritual tools, in particular daggers and stuff of that nature. And then he spent a lot of his life with military, and I think it was maybe the Navy, I don't know, something of that nature. But then in his 50s, he settled in a house in this beautiful part of England called New Forest, where he became involved and he was very fond of this theatrical group that was very heavily influenced by like philosophical and occultist themed plays and things of that nature. However, some of the members were tied in with this woman who he accredited later on, Old Dorothy, as initiating him into New Forest Coven, and then the rest is history. But he again, through traveling and through studying other culture, had started building this kind of as a younger adult. And then later in his more formative years and even later in life, solidified himself in this movement and kind of made a place publicly where we all know within our own practices that there's kind of there's a secrecy that we have to uphold, right? There is a personal endeavor that we have as practitioners to defend and not publicize certain things. And a lot of the people that I'm talking about today did not adhere to that, But to be fair, if they had, would we have the information that we have? Would we have heeded our call? Would our call have called to us? Maybe, maybe not. So regardless, moving on. So Ross Nichols, Mr. Nichols, born, I think his name was Peter Ross Nichols. He was an academic and a poet. He formed the Order of the Bards, right? That was run most recently by Mr. Philip Carr-Gomm, but he just was, I think there's a woman, Ymir or something, that just took over. You got to forgive me. I'm not a Druid, but I am of the Celtic neo-paganism, tribe. But the Druid order, he was a chairman of the ancient Druid order that traces back to the meeting of the Apple Tree Tavern, which in Covent Garden in England, 1717. And his major influence, which is funny because it's something that I had to read in my studies, was that James George Fraser, who wrote The Golden Bough, which is more or less an antique text along the same lines as like the modern day Secret or the Law of Attraction. Not to spoil it for you, it's an amazing point of reference, I think. But that was one of his things that he credited his influences to. And he was a principal of this college in England, and when he got his time off, he would go to this little nudist colony. And when he was there, he met Jerry. He met Gerald Gardner, and he had his own little nudist colony, and he was like, hey, come on, So they became buddies, and so right around the same time, that Jerry was handling the Wiccans, Nichols was making the way for modern day Druidry and the order that we know today. But that was fascinating because his contributions towards the Celtic neo-paganism in the 20th century, they're pretty prevalent. Moving forward, who brought Wicca to America? Good old Uncle Bucky. Uncle Bucky, Raymond Buckland, which I'm going to try to go pretty soon to his museum in Ohio and maybe get an interview with the guy who's running it. The guy who owns the material is not the same guy who runs it. But there's demon in boxes. It's all his spiritual stuff, which is really cool. And he was actually initiated, him and his wife, way back when, by Jerry himself. And he brought the Gardnerian witchcraft Wicca over to America and modified it in some ways and really individualized the practice for us witches who started out very solitary, which a lot of us do before joining a coven. And Raymond, he said he started reading everything after his uncle at the age of 12 gave him a book. He noted a book called God of the Witches, and I think it was by Murray, but I don't think that was the book. So I don't know what the book was. I know his uncle's name was George, but I don't know what it was. But so he was 12 when he read a book. It was given by his uncle, who was a spiritualist. Okay. Notably, these are all men. Funny enough, in craft, and also, to be fair, in a lot of like earthen religions, we recognize the goddess, the divine feminine. And so there is this aspect of feminism that goes hand in hand, which is a whole nother video, and not as heavy-handed as that word, it gets such a bad reputation. But just the counterpart of a masculine and feminine energy in creation. And so, funny enough, in my research for this video, just to see where these people got their start, the prevalence of male was very predominant. So let's get into some of the females. They're more modern. One of the more modern and widely known today is Lori Cabot. She's the witch from Salem. I think they say she's the official witch of Salem. She had that wonderful shop in Salem. She is a founder of two, I think, traditions of modern contemporary witchcraft. And she said that when looking to try to find how she started, she said that she was born, her dad was a scientist, so he didn't believe in the devil, which kind of helped her look into different ways of thinking about spirituality. Also, when she was 14, she moved to Boston with her mother to finish high school. And while she was there, she took a comparative religions course. And it brought her to the library, the public library of Boston, to do research. And while she was there, there was a lady. Now, it's not specified whether this was a librarian or not. I'm just assuming it probably was. I don't know. But the lady said, kind of coaxed her on the offhand, you should look a little bit past Abrahamic religions, dive a little deeper. And so she did. And then the lady introduced her to two other women, one of which was an older elderly woman who later Cabot says she initiated her as a witch. And the rest is history. She spent her time as a devout dancer and witch and, this, that, and the third. One of my favorite witches, Lori Bruno, also in Salem, had a store in Salem called Magica. I don't know if it's still there or not. She was born in 1940. I think she's still alive. I would love to meet her. It's like one of my goals. I like her no bullshit approach. And she's a hereditary high priestess, elder of the Sicilian Strega line. And she's part of the Craft of the Wise and founder of the Trinitarian Rose Church. I don't know. But I like the way she juxtaposes Christianity and pulls from that. And I think it's because I did have that dualist influence as a kid that I lean into the way that she describes. But anyway, so she has a vast history dating back to her ancestor, her famous ancestor. He was a famous astronomer, Giordano. I'm so sorry. Giordano. Jesus, Mary and Joseph, see? I should say God and Goddess. Giordano Bruno. And very well-known astronomer, and maybe an influence for why she worked for National Aeronautics and Space Administration in her 20s. And whilst doing that, she met Dr. Lewis, I think it's Leo Louis Martello, and he is a Sicilian Stregoni high priest in New York City. And they became very, very close and very good friends. And she often equates him as a mentor for her. In fact, he is the very reason he fought for the pagan community. And he was the one who got us the right to conduct our very first Wiccan in 1970 in Central Park in New York City. So thank you, Martello. But Lori Bruno is a wonderful witch, and she has a long hereditary thing. So, she was one of those people that it wasn't the path was, she was born on it, which is funny because most of the things that you're born on, you tend to stray from. So we'll see how that works. And there's so many other people that are notable here. Maxine Sanders, Margaret Murray, Doreen Valenti, Scott Cunningham, right? Silver. So Levette, the list goes on and on and on and on. There's a lot of people here as Z Budapest, okay? We could spend all night, but the key here is to realize that this path, and though whatever path it is you're on, it's nice to just meditate sometimes, go back